Hi there, welcome to Floating in Dreams. Today's video is going to be another ballad of the palettes, and today we're focusing on warm toned rosy palettes. In case you're new here, hi, my name is Maaike. I like to come on here to chat about eyeshadow palettes, essence and couture reviews, and getting the use out of my makeup. And once a month, I come on here to do a battle of the palettes where I award points in 12 rounds, like a boxing match, to 4 eyeshadow palettes that I've grouped together to see, how do these compare, price point, etc., etc. Really going over some metrics and then choose a winner. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's also my favorite palette, but based on these metrics and the points I'm giving, this is what I would call a winner, but you can give points along and maybe you can come to a different winner than I do. That's of course perfectly fine. And because I have fair skin with a cool to neutral undertone, it may be good to know that my makeup preferences are just skewed by that fact, and what I like definitely goes into this video as well. And I know what I like because I've been reviewing makeup for more than a decade, so when I say something is a favorite, it's a favorite. So yeah, if you want to see more from that perspective, if you're a fellow snow angel, then hi, please subscribe down below. If you'd like to join the family, let's get into the video. So yes, battle of the eyeshadow palettes, 12 rounds. What palettes are we chatting about? In the red corner, we have the Tartelette Juicy. This is a pretty warm tone color story with some pinks, and that's sort of where this video idea came from. In the green corner, I'm just holding up the box here, Pat McGrath's Divine Rose 1, because this is another warm toned rosy palette in my book. Then in the yellow corner, we are going to be chatting about the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2. This is of course a fairly recent palette. I only tried it a few months ago, but I thought it could be nice to put that in the comparison. And then the last one in the blue corner, Back Talk by Urban Decay. This was of course limited edition, so you can no longer buy it, even though when I googled this, it did pop up on an Amazon seller, so maybe someone still sells it somewhere on eBay. If you were interested, but this is what the Back Talk looked like. I felt it would go really nicely with these other palettes, and I don't have that many warm tone palettes, you could say, so it was a bit of a challenge to figure out which ones to compare. But I did cool tone, rosy tone, so I thought, why not do a warm tone version as well? So in the first couple of rounds, I just want to go over some basic metrics here. Round number 1 is price point. So the Tarte in the red corner is 40 euros. The green corner, Pat McGrath, is $130 or euros. That hurts. The yellow corner, the Patrick Ta, is also quite expensive. That's 68. And in the blue corner, we have the Urban Decay, which used to retail for 53 euros. I had to go to very old blog posts to find that number, but yeah, it retailed for 53 euros. So round number 1 is won by Tarte because it's the cheapest, 40 euros for the Tartelette Juicy, so that's why they get a point. Round number 2, availability. So where can you buy these? Are they easy to find and buy? So in the red corner, the Tarte is mainly available through Sephora. Now I have been informed by some of you that the Tarte official website actually doesn't just only ship internationally, but it's quite easy shipping, and that over a certain amount they don't charge you any shipping fees, and they will actually also cover all the handling fees, and that you haven't been hit with custom fees if you did buy from outside of the US. So that's easy, but I've personally never placed an order with Tarte through their official website, but apparently it's quite easy to do. So that makes them a little easier to get a hold of than what I had anticipated, because I've been mainly buying Tarte through Sephora. Yeah, and we all know that in Europe, French Sephora is officially the only website that caters to all of Europe. I'm hoping the UK website will continue to do European shipping, but I've got no way to check that so far. Then the Pat McGrath, I think, is actually the widest one in terms of availability. You can get it through their official website. They also include all of the shipping and handling fees. That's personally where I have bought most of my Pat McGrath things over time. However, they're also for sale through Sephora and Douglas, so if those websites or retailers have sales, they're usually included as well, as far as I believe. But yeah, I've bought most of my Pat McGrath things through their official website, and I think it's got pretty good service. But if you are in Europe, especially if you like buy one of the newer releases, or if you want to get something through Black Friday, they are a little bit slower on getting the shipments out. That may be good to know. Then in the yellow corner, Patrick Ta currently is only available through Cult Beauty for me, and in terms of availability, it's just terrible because whenever these products sell out, they're hardly ever restocked. So it can take, like, once one of the Patrick Ta products goes out of stock, it can take up to 6 months for them to restock it, which is terrible. Then in the blue corner, of course, the Urban Decay Back Talk has been discontinued, but as I mentioned, I did, like, in a Google search, find that someone on Amazon is still selling these. Maybe if you go on resale websites like Poshmark, Mercari, or eBay, you may find one of these, but then of course, it's very difficult to say whether these are even the actual real palette. Try not to get scammed when you do buy through these like resale websites. It's not one you can still get, but I thought it just made for a good comparison here. So the point here goes to Pat McGrath, the green corner, because I do feel they are the easiest to get from my experience. Round number 3, grams of product. The Tarte has 18 grams. The Tartelette in Bloom, which I featured in one of my previous videos, has 18 grams. And the Juicy, which is a similar style palette, also has 18 grams. So that's lovely. The Pat McGrath only has 13 grams of product, which is the least of any of the palettes here. And yet it is the most expensive. The Patrick Ta comes in at 21.6 grams of product, which that's a decent amount of eyeshadow, given that you only get 12 pans, but we get to the amount of pans in a minute. But the Urban Decay here actually takes the cake, and I think it's to do with the fact that one side of this palette has face products in. This contains 25 grams of product, which is a lot. So here, the point goes to the Urban Decay. Round number 4 is the amount of pans. As I mentioned, it was coming up. We have the red corner, Tarte, 12 pans. Pat McGrath only has 10. The Patrick Ta has 12, but 2 of those are cream. So do we then get 12 eyeshadows? So it's a bit, And then in the Urban Decay, we get 8 pans of eyeshadow and 4 pans of face products, which means that this comes in at 12 pans as well. I personally have used the Urban Decay palette as an eyeshadow palette, the whole thing. So I've never really put the blushes on my cheeks. I use them as eyeshadows, and I feel that they sort of fill in some of the gaps of what the eyeshadow palette has to offer. So for me, I just view this as a 12 pan eyeshadow palette, but I do realize that that's probably not the case for everyone. So just based on that, we're gonna give the point to the Tarte, because that's 12 eyeshadow pans, so it's the most, and there's no weird things going on here. So Tarte gets the point. Round number 5 is packaging, and for this I'm gonna have to show you the palettes at the same time, so I hope I'm not dropping my laptop, which is like sitting in my lap here. So we have the Tarte. This is the Tartelette Juicy. It's square, pretty good solid plastic packaging. Like the In Bloom, it's got a snap closure, it's got a nice size mirror, and I really like the way these Tarte palettes have been laid out. Like, there's not a whole lot of wasted space here. It's just a very functional palette. So the Tarte has the snap closure, and it's square, easy to store, it's small, you could travel with this, no problems. Green corner, Miss Pat. It's an expensive palette. The packaging is completely outrageously just extravagant goodness. If that's your style, if that's what you like, you do you. We get the outer box, which I've kept because I have 4 of these, and if you have 4 of these palettes sitting in a drawer, you will not be able to tell them apart because they all look the same. Some of the limited editions, I believe this one in particular, came in like a pink case, but I don't have that one. And then in here you get the separate inlay with the shade names. So that's another thing you should know. Plus, my box got a little broken in the mail. So when they ship this over, the actual palette inside it is so heavy that when it shakes about in the cardboard box during shipment, I've had some of the boxes actually break on me and getting ripped on the sides. But yeah, this is what the palette looks like. You get the gold plating in the back. It's not real gold, of course. This feels really heavy. I would not recommend traveling with this at all. We get a giant mirror, which is beveled, and then inside it you get your 10 shades of eyeshadow, which are, you know, nice, but I do feel there's a bit of wasted space here, and with how chunky this is, like, did it have to be this thick? I don't know. I don't think so. Then the Patrick Ta is another rectangular shaped palette. It's also plastic. It's really not that big. It's got a snap closure again. And what I do appreciate it, we get some creams in here and they're under the little flap. So in terms of like getting your powders into your creams, that's not likely to happen, which I do appreciate here. And these are just the shades that you get then. So this is a nice enough packaging as well. The Urban Decay, I think the thing that sets it back the most is actually the packaging. This is chunky, it is rectangular. I think it's a similar size to the Patrick Ta, actually, a little shorter, but it's just really, really fat. And the reason for that is because you get the mirror that's inside it. So the mirror stands up like this, and it's magnetic. So you can pop that out, and I do really like how this palette can like lay flat on a vanity. It's cardboard, it's got magnets, so from that perspective, it's really, really cool. And as you can see here, I hope you can see what I mean with some of these shades fitting into the eyeshadow palette quite nicely. But the struggle is that magnets, of course, only work one way round. So to get this mirror to go back in, because if you put it in the wrong way, your palette won't close. So you actually need to turn the mirror around, and then it does stay put. Oh, it doesn't. Now it works. Like, it just, sometimes you just need to figure out how to put it back together. So the packaging of this one is completely outrageous, and this is one of the reasons why I know a lot of people didn't like this one. But in terms of color story, I have always liked mine. But yeah, I think for what it does, I think the Tarte one is the most effective. We don't have anything here with removable pans, which is always a bonus point for me. So that's why that one is going to win. However, someone mentioned in the comments that Tarte palettes are now magnetic. I only have older ones, so I should maybe try, because this is the most recent one I have, to see if they are magnetic. If that's the case, then this is even more of a winner. But yeah, I was going to give the point to the Tarte anyways, so red corner wins. Then in the 6th round, we're going to talk pigmentation. In the Tarte, we get buildable yet pigmented shades. I find that the Tarte palette does have sort of like more sheer to buildable kind of pigmentation. It's not too kapow in your face. They're very workable shadows that no matter what skill level you have, you're going to be able to make them work. And that's why I've always loved the Tarte formula for sure. The Pat McGrath in the green corner has pretty intense pigmentation, but I do feel that because we get some different finishes, which is actually the next question, I do feel that the way each shade works really depends on the finish it has. So I feel that the mattes are really blendable yet pigmented, the shimmers as well, but those 4 special shades, which we'll talk about in a minute, those can be a little bit more flaky, a bit more difficult to work with, and they also tend to be sheer and better used as toppers. They may not go on fully opaque all over the lid if that's what you were looking for. So that's why the Pat McGrath I'm gonna knock down for that. The Patrick Ta is quite possibly the most pigmented version here, and that's what we're talking about in this round, just sheer pigmentation. If what you want is super pigmented, like boom, bow, kapow, pigment kind of thing in your eyeshadows, then definitely try the Patrick Ta. It's definitely the most intense. And then the Urban Decay, like the Tarte, is more like sheer, buildable, and especially because we have some face products in there, those already tend to be sheer to begin with. So that does mean that you do need to build those up a bit more even. So here, the Patrick Ta gets the point. I think that in terms of pigmentation, nothing can beat that palette. We're talking textures and finishes, and we actually have a couple here that do have just something more interesting. In the Tarte, we just get mattes and shimmers. It's, you know, it's a good one, but it's like with the In Bloom, like the shimmers that you get in here all have the same level of shimmer. There's nothing that stands out as being more sparkly or interesting or creamy or whatever. It's just mattes and shimmers, and that's what we get, which, you know, in terms of workability, it still works very, very well, but that's not what the question is about. Your Pat McGrath, of course, we have 3 mattes, 3 standard shimmers, and then 4 special shades, where I feel that this is the most sparkly one, and then these 2 are a little bit more on the satin side. Like, these are easiest to use by itself, whereas these 2 are more like toppers. So we do also get different finishes in the special shades. So in terms of giving you a lot of different textures and finishes, I think the Pat McGrath takes the cake. But the Patrick Ta, of course, you get not only the mattes and the shimmers, but I already mentioned the creams that you get. So in here we also get something that's a bit more interesting. The Urban Decay, however, there's really nothing too different here in terms of your shimmers and your mattes. That's all you get, and the shimmers you get in here are quite satiny, so that has to be your cup of tea. So for me, the Pat McGrath, because it just has the most the most to offer in terms of texture, would be the winner. Round number 8 is the matte to shimmer ratio. So in the Tarte we get a 50-50 split, 6 mattes, 6 shimmers, which is nice. But the Pat McGrath, it just has the 3 mattes and everything else has a shimmer to it. And because I love myself a shimmer, the Pat McGrath is definitely the one that I think I'm going to give the point to. The yellow one, a yellow corner, Patrick Ta, it has the 2 creams. But to me, those didn't really work as eyeshadows, so I'm just going to take them out of the equation here. So we get 5 mattes and 5 shimmers, which also makes it an equal split, which is nice. And then in the Urban Decay, I think we get 4 mattes? Yes. 4 mattes, 1 matte blush, and everything else has a shimmer to it. So the Pat McGrath here wins for sure, because it just does, again, a little bit more of the shimmers, and that's what I prefer. The more shimmers, the better in my book. But I appreciate a good 50-50 split, so the Tarte and the Patrick Ta also could have gotten the point. I mean, for me, the Patrick Ta doesn't get the point because of the creams, and the Tarte just because it doesn't have anything beyond just a standard shimmer. Round number 9 then, the color story. So these are all warm tones, which are not necessarily my favorites, but the Tartelette Toasted? No, the Tartelette Juicy. It does have this row of cooler tones, which is why the palette works for me. So I think that if I didn't have that bottom row, I wouldn't have liked this as much as I do now. This row looks neutral. I think if you have a warmer undertone, on me it pulls quite warm toned, and then you get your row of pinks. So I feel in terms of balance, we do get something quite nice here. In the Pat McGrath, I do really like a couple of shades. Like, I love these 2 and I love these 2, but some of the other shades I really, really don't like. This peach and gold really didn't do much for me. So I've been saying in the past how I would have liked the palette to be this, and then maybe even minus that, like those 3 shades I just don't love, because that makes it very, very warm toned. Like maybe even like this quad. Like if this could have been a 6-pan, I think I would have liked it better. So for me, even though we get a lot of special shades, the color story, because this is definitely also aimed at fair skin, it just didn't really come together for me because it was just too warm and it clashed quite badly with my skin tone. So I think this can be really, really nice if you want a more fair toned eyeshadow palette, but you want it to be more warm toned rosy, then this is good. But for me personally, it didn't hit all the markers. The Patrick Ta has stunning shades. If you want a warm tone palette that's going to give you glam, this guy is stunning, and especially these like deeper shades on this end, which I had not expected. I thought I was going to like this like mauviness over here, but I really appreciated these more reddish tones that we get here. This has stunning shades, stunning looks, but overall I just felt this color story was very limited because it's very monochromatic. So for me, this wasn't a winner. Actually, the winner is going to be my Urban Decay, because I feel that where the other ones have warm tones and they've got some mauves or pinks, this actually does all of it. So without it being too red or whatever, this is still fairly neutral. So we do get our like warmer brown tone here, and then this like more like cranberry looking shade, but we get something plummy. We get our mauve tone shimmers, and then also in the blushes, we get this really pretty mauve toned and like warm rosy peachy tones. This is a great inner corner highlight. So I just felt that in terms of what I want, if I think rosy warm tones, for me it's the back talk. Still, till this day. Round number 10 then, blendability. Are these easy to blend? Tarte, for sure. That sheer to buildable formula that I've mentioned when I talked about pigmentation, I personally love, not only because it just makes it easier to use, it usually makes it much more easy to blend, which is why I always recommend Tarte. If you're a beginner in makeup and you don't know where to start, check out Tarte because they do some really great things. But here, the Pat McGrath, actually, in terms of performance, I think is one of the best palettes ever, even though I don't love the color story. These mattes blend themselves, and the pigmentation is at a far, far higher level than what the Tarte will give you. So that's why, because the pigmentation has been amped up, usually more pigments means more difficult to blend. But with this palette, that is definitely not the case. So we get a great performing palette that has great pigmentation, great blendability, and not a single shade in here is a dud in terms of it, you know, being not like a texture or a finish or something that you can't make work. You can make it work, but it may just, you know, it does mean a bit of a learning curve perhaps. The Patrick Ta then, and this is where the Patrick Ta is really going to fall behind, because as pigmented as this is and how easy to blend the mattes are in this palette, I think the mattes are what saves this palette, because the mattes in here are some of the best mattes I have ever worked with. But you can guess it coming. The shimmers are, I can't call them lackluster because they're very intense shimmers, but the shimmers are very difficult to work with if you're trying to use a brush. So with fingers, these work marvelously well, but your fingers are quite thick and chunky, so you can tap it all over the lid, but to do something more subtle or detailed on the lower lash line is pretty much impossible with this. So for me, I felt very limited because I didn't get the texture or like the formula I needed to do like the kind of looks I like to do. And we get the creams, and I've already mentioned it that I would like to discard the creams here because to me those were an absolute nightmare, and they're the thing that really drags this palette down for me. The creams are sticky, they don't work as a base for me because they were too dark, and then when I tried to blend eyeshadow on top, I couldn't blend it anymore. So then I was like, maybe I can use it as a liner, but it's too sticky for that, and it actually transferred because I have a bit of a hooded eye. So when I use it as a liner, it stamped itself to like just underneath my brow. So after an hour, I had this really nice dark brown line sitting just below my eyebrow, which wasn't great. So for me, the Patrick Ta is not perfect. And then the Urban Decay, it's super easy to blend, but it's also quite sheer precisely because of those face products. I already mentioned that. So this just needs a bit too much building up. And the shimmers in the palette are just pretty satiny and just not that impactful. And by now, like now that we're so many years ahead on time, I want a bit more for my shadows. So for me, it goes to Pat. Then round number 11 is the amount of fallout we get. The Tarte palette has no fallout whatsoever. So the red corner is pretty safe here. It's so easy to work with, and it also stays put over time. The Pat McGrath, I feel, doesn't have any fallout, but as you're using these shades, you do have to make sure you really tap off your brush, because I feel that if you don't do that, you could actually create some fallout, especially with some of the more intense mattes. In the Patrick Ta, I feel that the mattes are really easy to work with, as I already mentioned, but this palette is the most prone to fallout. The shimmers are incredibly flaky, and if you don't use a sticky base and finger application, they're gonna fall down your cheeks, and with a brush this just goes everywhere. This is also the palette where you could run the risk, depending on how hooded your eyes are, that the shadow can fall down your face over time during the day. So that's a risk here. With the Urban Decay, no fallout whatsoever either, but I do feel this kind of shears out over time. So this eyeshadow palette just kind of has a tendency to disappear. Which brings me to the winner here, which is going to be the Tarte. The red corner is going to get a point because I feel that in terms of fallout, it's just the best one. Now, in terms of longevity, I've already touched upon it here a little bit. The Tarte lasts all day as well. No fallout, no creasing, provided you do a good enough prime. But I feel that the Tarte does lose a bit of its luster after like a full day of wear. The Pat McGrath stuff I really, really like. On me, it can last all day, but I do feel you have to be very careful in how you apply them. Especially those special shades. I have had the experience, not just with this palette, but other palettes as well. If you don't have a matte in the crease, they could kind of transfer. So you do have to be very mindful, but when you get it there and you get it to stay, it just stays looking phenomenal all day long. And I feel that this is the kind of eyeshadow that even if you've had a long work day, you can just, you know, tap on a bit of the extra sparkle and you can go clubbing right after work. That's the kind of palette this is to me. So for me, that really has outstanding performance. I already mentioned how the Patrick Ta is more prone to creasing and transferring to the top lid. And also those shimmers, because they have that very creamy formula that can be difficult to pick up with a brush. It can crease more easily. So that can sort of, the oils in the shadows can start breaking up in combination with the oils of your lid. And especially if you have hooded eyes, it can be more difficult to make those stick. And then last but not least, the Urban Decay, it does last over all day long, but I already mentioned that it kind of shears out. Like the Tarte, it kind of loses its luster after a few hours. So here the point again goes to the Pat McGrath, and where in recent videos I've done like this, I've had a very clear like favorite where one palette got most of the points and it was like 6 points and everything else only had like 1. In here it's quite neck and neck because the red corner Tarte has 4 points, the Pat McGrath has 5, the Patrick Ta has 1, and the Urban Decay has 2. That still means that the Pat McGrath wins, but officially, because they have the most points, so the green corner, congratulations. But Tarte came very, very close to being a winner here with 4 points. I think if I had made some other choices towards the end of the rounds, like for instance with the fallout and the longevity, that I think they're pretty neck and neck, and then the red corner could have won here as well. So I think the Tarte palette, especially if you look at it being the most affordable we have here, it definitely is at a similar level to me as the Pat McGrath. So that may be good to know. So I really hope you liked today's video. Please thumbs it up if you did, and let me know in a comment down below how you scored these palettes. I would love to know. And if you'd like to stay tuned for more, I do regular eyeshadow palette content over on this channel. So if you'd like to stay tuned for that, subscribe to the channel. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye-bye!